Shabbat Shalom again.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I want to continue from the PowerPoint with a message from Mount Sinai for us today. What is the message from Mount Sinai to us today? And like I was saying, if you really think about it, nothing happens by accident with Yahweh. And just like with the Dead Sea Scrolls, for 2,000 years for those scrolls to lay in that cave, it just happened to come out on the very night that Israel is being voted on to become a modern nation. Says that there's got to be something important in those scrolls. And it's interesting because really they were the first kibbutz. You know, the word kibbutz is community, and that movement started in Israel in 1910. But if they had found the scrolls before that, you know, the movement would not have been called kibbutz. You know, it would have been called Yahad. That's what our school comes from. Yahad is the togetherness. So the same way, for Yahweh to preserve those things over there for 3,500 years in the carvings, that's amazing. How? Because this is, you're talking about intense heat, 115, 120 degrees, sometimes even higher than that. And year after year after year, how on earth can those carvings stay there and stay intact when, you know, they didn't have professional equipment to carve them and make them? They're basically just using other rocks or, you know, that they're making for them. So I want to go into today, what is the importance of it? You know, I mean, it's when people see things online, you know, and all the time there's a new archaeological thing being found and this is being found, it's all interesting and neat. But what is the real importance for us today? The first point I want to make is we could be entering the last 7 years before the return of Yeshua. Don't know that for sure. Could be 2 sevens. To me, like I said, I live in eternity, so it doesn't matter whether it's 1 7, 2 7, 3 sevens, because I'm living in a kingdom mindset every day. But the bottom line is, if you do believe, then a day is going to come where Yeshua's feet is going to stand on the Mount of Olives and Yahweh's kingdom is going to be here. So everything in this world is timed, and Yahweh at creation set out 6,000 years for man to prove that his way doesn't work, and then the 1,000-year millennium of restoring it. And we are living in the last generation where this is the beginning of the restoration. Yahweh's restoration has already started. And we're part of that, not just our congregation, but other congregations. So we could be entering that. In Daniel 9, verse 24, Daniel 9, verse 24, talks about the 70 weeks prophecy. 70 weeks are decreed to your people and to your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make atonement for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know then and understand that from the issuing of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It shall be built again with a plaza and a trench, even in times of affliction. And after 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, and literally that means to be killed, but not for himself, right? It's for the people. And the people of a coming ruler will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will be with a flood, and its ruins are determined, and the war will be until the end. And he, talking about the coming prince, you know, which it was the Romans who originally did this, will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, talking about a peace agreement, and very interesting. Right now, Israel is having war, right? Since October, horrible things happening. But watch out when all this ends, and it's probably going to end pretty fast. Watch out for some kind of peace deal to come in very, very quickly. Living there for 20 years, I can tell you, it seems almost impossible for a peace deal to come in, but all this is leading up for all this. It's not going to be a real peace deal anyway. But they are going to come up with something, and it might be sooner than you think, even though it doesn't look like it right now. And it says, in the middle of the week, the middle of the 7, he will cause the sacrifice and the offering to cease. That's why people believe they are going to start animal sacrifice again. You don't necessarily need a temple for that. I put a message up a couple of weeks ago on that. Will a temple be built? And it talks all about that. And of the most outer corners, abominations by a desolator, even until the end, and that which was decreed shall be poured on the desolator. So it's very interesting. If you look at the book of Daniel, which is a really, really interesting book, the Jews have it in their Tanakh, they have it in with the writings, but really Daniel is a prophet. Even Yeshua calls him Daniel the prophet. So we have it in our Bible, we have it in with the prophets. But the book of Daniel is mostly end time. It's mostly end time things. And yet, this prophecy here in Daniel 9 is probably the most strongest, compelling prophecy of Yeshua being the Messiah. And I can tell you, living in Israel, I've talked with many rabbis. When we lived in Jerusalem for almost 6 years, I would be called in all the time by the rabbis, and they would ask things. And to almost every prophecy, they have an answer, except for this one. Because it's very clear. When the decree goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem with the walls till Messiah, the Prince, it will be 70 weeks of 7. And after 69 weeks he comes. So, we know when this happened. 457 BC, Artaxerxes the king, the Persian king, gave that decree to go and restore the walls of Jerusalem. Exactly 483 years later, in 27 AD, Yeshua came claiming to be the Messiah. So my question to the rabbis is, if it's not him, who was it then in 27 AD? And a matter of fact, the rabbis have a big problem now, because in 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, all of the records were destroyed. So there's a reason why in the New Testament, not in the Tanakh, but in the New Testament, in both Matthew and Luke, you have 2 genealogies for Yeshua. Because you have to have a genealogy to get to the Messiah, right? Because we know the Messiah has to come through a certain lineage. But now those genealogies have been destroyed, so how will they get a Messiah? The other thing is, Micah 5:2 talks about the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. So I joke with the rabbis and say, are you telling me the Messiah then will be an Arab? Because Bethlehem today is 100% Arab. So, a lot of things can change, who knows. But the bottom line is, if the book of Daniel is mostly for the end time, then you would think that this prophecy would be dual. And very interesting, many years ago I was watching BBC and they were showing a documentary on Jerusalem, and they said, of course, these are not the ancient walls of Jerusalem. Some are, depending on where you are. There are about 10,000 Herodian stones, but most of them are new walls. And they said the decree went out by the Turkish king Suleiman in the year 1538. And I'm like, I can count. 77s, 1538, add 490 years, and you come up with 2028. Which is an interesting year, because Yeshua came in the year 27. We know that for sure. If I have any more calendar books there, you're happy to take them. I have a whole chapter on when Yeshua's ministry was. And we know that when Yeshua came, his first year of ministry was in a Shemitah year, because of John 4. It talks about at around Shavuot time, there was still a harvest there. And he said, do not say there is 4 months left to the harvest. Look, the harvest is already white. That would only be in a Shemitah year. Because by Shavuot, in every other year, all of those, the wheat and the barley, they would have already been cut already. But in a Shemitah year, they wouldn't. So, interesting enough, if you look at the 9 historical references for Shemitah years, 27 being one of them, over a period of like 400 or 500 years, by all different historians, they all fall in the same lot. So that's why I say I don't think we have a problem with the Shemitah year, because historically we have 9 references. The Bible says in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, we have 9 of them. So a famous Jewish historian, Ben Zion Watchholder, who goes over a lot of this, he also believed that 28-29 was a Jubilee. And it's interesting that when Yeshua was speaking in the synagogue in Nazareth, he quotes Isaiah 61, which is about the Jubilee coming. So if 28-29 was a Jubilee, then 2028-29 would also be a Jubilee. It's every 50 years. You just count 50. So the fact that the decree went out in 1538 and you add 490 years also comes to 2028. So I've had messages I gave all online why possibly between 2028 and 2030 we could be in the last 7. I'm not going to go into more on that right now. You could listen to that online. But that's one message we have today. And if we're not going into the last 7, even if there's 2 sevens left, believe me, they go fast. They go really fast. I can't believe how, it just hit me a couple months ago, like we're in the year 2024. We've had almost 25 years since the Y2K. Remember Y2K? That seemed like it was about a year or two ago, And here we are, almost 25 years later. Time goes fast. But one way or another, whether it's 1 7 or 2 sevens, or even in the outset if it was 3 sevens, the time is short. And that's one of the reasons why Yahweh is bringing that message for us today, because we're in the time of Reformation. We're in the restoration time period. We know that because of Matthew 24:32. It says about the end time. How does the end time start? Learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and it puts out leaves, you know that summer is near. Right? Who is the fig tree? We know from prophecy, we know from the book of Jeremiah that Israel is the fig tree. It talks about in Jeremiah 24, good figs and bad figs, and Israel is represented as the fig tree. And Psalm 90, 9 and 10, Psalm 90 being written by Moses himself, right? The only psalm that I know of that Moses wrote. And look what he says. He says, for all our days pass away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. The days of our years are 70. That's an average lifestyle. And if by strength we live 80 years, yet their pride is a labor in vanity. So Israel, does Israel have strength? They sure have. Think about it. Today you have Egypt, you have Syria, you have countries that have been there for more than 3,000 years. And in the world scene, they're not very strong. Syria is pathetic. They're not strong at all. Egypt is not that strong. Israel, who's only been there for 75 years, is like the 4th or 5th most powerful military in the world. So add 80 years in their strength to the year they started in 1948, and you come out with 2028 again. So many things seem to point to that time period between 2028 and 2030. Again, I'm not prophesying. I'm not saying Yahweh told me. I'm not saying, I'm giving you food for thought. And again, I say, possibly there could be 2 sevens. We will find out. That's why the Shemitah cycle is so important, because the Shemitah cycle shows us the time periods. Everything works in cycles of 7. Everything does. So again, whether it's 1 or 2, one thing I will say, as far as the time being short, which proved to me, because I've known about all this stuff with conspiracy and New World Order and all that. I've been hearing about that stuff for 40 years. And I believe a lot of it. A lot of it is manufactured. And you can't, like the Bible says in Isaiah, don't say a conspiracy to everything. So you want to make sure you prove this stuff. But one thing to me is trying to prove it to somebody. It was very difficult because it's circumstantial evidence that you can build on top of each other to clearly prove that there's a global government that's trying to make a one world order. But to prove it in a way was very difficult until COVID. COVID comes now, it's easy. Because every country on earth did it. Every country on earth did something. There was no pandemic. There was nothing. They went from 2015, they started already patenting all the stuff for COVID. 2 months before COVID happened, in Committee 301 or whatever it was called with the UN, they practiced it. So the whole thing was a sham. Not to say people didn't get sick and die. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it was planned. It was planned. It was manufactured. They tried to make it seem worse than what it was. And every country on earth was part of it. Even countries that had virtually no cases. Locking people down. And why aren't they doing it now? Locking down, wearing masks, and doing it. Even though they know those masks, you could prove it that masks do nothing. The vaccine was a killer. More people died from the vaccine that were safe from the vaccine. We haven't even started seeing it. Cancer rates that have skyrocketed from it. And now all this stuff is coming out. And what they're trying to do is, and I hope they do, that they have like they had the Nuremberg trials, because people need to be brought to account for all the deaths that were unnecessary. But here you got it. You got it now. You could clearly prove to something that a conspiracy, it's no longer a conspiracy theory, it's a conspiracy. Because all the world did it. Every one of these leaders played into it. So if that doesn't show you how close we are to the end, because I believe it was a wake-up call to us. Because I'm telling you, we lived where we could not go out and buy food if we were not vaccinated. We couldn't buy food. And we used to go to the supermarket with a policeman standing there. And he'd say, show me your papers, show me your vaccination. We don't have it. And my wife would always say, so you're telling me I can't buy food if I'm not vaccinated? And they'd say yes. And now, you probably know this, our brother from South Sudan. In Sudan and in Kenya, they're starting with chipping. They're starting with bringing out chipping people, and you cannot be part of society. You can't buy and sell, and you can't work. It's mandatory to be chipped like an animal. So, read Revelation, you know. You will not be able to buy and sell. They're going to be in the right hand and the forehead. You know, it doesn't take much. All you have to do is believe what you're reading there, right? So, that's part of it. Part of it is, as we see these things happening today, it shows us. The other thing is Ezekiel 40 in verse 1. Ezekiel 40 in verse 1. It says, and this is the only scripture in all the Bible that actually shows a jubilee. In the 25th year of the exile, in the beginning of the year, which is Rosh Hashanah, in the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the city was struck, on the same day the hand of Yahweh was on me, and he brought me there. So, very interesting. It talks about Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means the head of the year. The only time, because the year begins in Aviv, right? Aviv 1 is the beginning of the year. What is the only time that the year does not begin in Aviv? Jubilee. The only time the year begins in the 10th of the month is during the Jubilee year. So this is the only scripture in all of the Bible that actually marks it. And you know, it's interesting. If you look at Ezekiel, what is Ezekiel called? Ezekiel is called the watchman. What does a watchman do? Tells time, right? And there is more time references in Ezekiel than any other book in the Bible. On the 14th day of this, and the 15th day of this, and this month. So as we're looking at this here, it's telling us in the 25th year of the exile, in the beginning of the year. So if this is the Jubilee, all you have to do is count back 25 years from the exile, and you could tell which year was a Jubilee, and again it brings us to 2028. Our note says the phrase beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, the only time Rosh Hashanah was on the 10th day of the month, and the is in a Jubilee year. So all of this points to that, and again, it's all subjective, we will see, not making any prophecies, just saying something to watch for. That's what we're told again, to watch and pray. So it may or may not be that we're entering into the 7, but one thing is for sure, it's going to come. If it doesn't come this time, it'll come the next time, but we are going to come. It's going to come one way or another. So the second thing is that we are beginning the second wilderness. And the Bible talks all about this, and not only the first covenant, but the new covenant about the wilderness. It talks about the wilderness of the Israelites and how they failed, and it talks about the second wilderness that's going to come. So in Ezekiel 20, Ezekiel 20, in verse 34. It says, and I will bring you out from the people and gather you from the lands in which you were scattered among them with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with fury poured out. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and I will be judging with you there face to face. Just as I was judging your fathers in the wilderness in the land of Egypt, so I will be judging you, declares Adonai Yahweh. So he's comparing this second wilderness journey with the first wilderness journey that's there. So, and we have begun that. We have begun that second wilderness journey. And like the first wilderness journey, where did it start? Mount Sinai. The second wilderness journey also starts at Mount Sinai. So I think that's a major landmark as Yahweh's people, that he restored Mount Sinai now. You know, like I said, it's been 3,500 years. And I know I've waited 35 years. I would have went there, given my right arm to go there to see it. Couldn't do it. There was no tourism in Saudi Arabia, period. You couldn't get in there. And the few people that did sneak in there, like Ron Wyatt, wound up getting arrested. You know, so the fact that Yahweh's opening it up shows because the second wilderness journey has begun. Galatians 4 in verse 21. Galatians 4 in verse 21. Says, I say to you, those who desire to let themselves be under the penalty of the Torah, do you not hear what the Torah says? For it has been written, Abraham had 2 sons, one out of the slave woman and one out of the free woman. But indeed, he of the slave woman has been born according to flesh, and he out of the free woman through the promise. Therefore, these things were symbolic of the 2 covenants. The one from Mount Sinai having given birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For Hagar is Mount Sinai, where? In Arabia. Not in the Sinai Peninsula, but in Saudi Arabia. And it surrenders to this Jerusalem, which is now in bondage with her children. But the Jerusalem which is above is free, which is the mother of all of us. So, wow. The Apostle Paul here, you couldn't give a worse insult to our brother Judah in this time, where he's comparing them to Hagar. You know, he's comparing them to the child born, not from the covenant, but the other one. But he's showing the 2 covenants, one coming from Mount Sinai and given birth in Saudi Arabia. But where is the real covenant? The Jerusalem which is above is free and the mother of all of us. So, we kept the feast 19 years. 19 years is 1 full moon cycle. That's the way the moon cycle goes. And that wasn't up to me. That was Yahweh. It wasn't up to me to start the feast there. It wasn't up to me to end the feast there. But all I know is if I didn't end the feast there, we wouldn't have had a feast for several years. Because as soon as Yahweh said, it's time to go to the wilderness, Israel shut down. For 2.5 years, even people that lived there, if you were a Jew and you were out of the country, you couldn't get back in the country. It was very difficult. Because during COVID, they completely shut the country down. And now after COVID, it was open for maybe 7-9 months, something like that, and then the war came. So we would have had real big problems, but we were blessed to host the feast there for one 19-year time cycle. And I say that then, I say it now, that when you look, there are thousands, I think there's 20,000 archaeological sites in Israel. So you can come there, and I can take you to Tel Dan, where the Danites lived, and I can show you Jerusalem, and I can show you Caesarea, and they found the stadium there, and there during the Roman times. But what you see there is ruins. So I'll show you rocks, and I can show you a picture of how it looked, and you have to in your mind visualize it, and everything is like a shadow, like it's saying here. But now it's the reality. So for that time, during this restoration, Yahweh was getting us ready by showing us that. And it was amazing, because when you go to Israel and you see all these things, you'll never read your Bible the same way again. It's totally different how you're reading it, because you're seeing with your eyes. How you think of it one way, growing up in the West, compared to going there and seeing with your eyes. But even then, it's still a shadow. It's still a shadow. You go today, Israel is not ancient Israel. The first congregation that was there is not still there today. It's a modern country. And in one way, it's a mini Babylon. They want to be more like America than they want to be like ancient Israel. And the thing that really hit for us, that we knew something big was coming, we found out that they were changing the Sabbath laws. And I say this like, Israel was the only place on the earth where, we volunteered in a Messianic bookstore there. And all week long, we would be, haranguing with Christians that would come in and say the law is nailed to the cross, and we would be telling them why it's not, But Friday afternoon, everybody's got to say Shabbat Shalom. Even Arabs say Shabbat Shalom. Everybody says Shabbat Shalom. And it's the only place on earth where everything stops, and it's like amazing. It was so neat to see that. No more. No more. There are some places still in religious areas where they're keeping the Shabbat like before. But I remember in Tiberias where we were living, and we came into our landlord, and we were all upset because we found out, all the stores are opening on Shabbat. And our landlord said, we said, yeah, did you hear all the stores are opening on Shabbat? And our landlord, at the same time we spoke, and we said, isn't it terrible? And she said, isn't it great? And we both spoke at the same exact time. We were like, oh. But unfortunately, I knew that was a biggie, because that is the sign between Yahweh and His children forever. That's one of the signs. Circumcision was the sign of the first covenant. Baptism is the sign of the new covenant, but the Sabbath is the sign between Yahweh and His children. And to take that sign and cast it away is common. I knew something big was happening. And all I can say is, I'm not here to judge our brother Judah. I love them. I have many, many friends there. I feel terrible for them, what's going on. But all I can say is anybody with an honest mind cannot say what happened on October 7th was a blessing. And it didn't just happen on October 7th. It happened exactly 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War, And it happened on Simchat Torah, the joy of the Torah. And that would never ever happen if they were obedient, ever. Because that's Yahweh's promise. You keep my feast and I'm going to protect you. And that was a sign from Yahweh that his hand is not there anymore. So again, like I said, I don't make these decisions. They come from people upstairs. I just follow. And Yahweh moved. I remember most people, when we started keeping the feast in the wilderness, most people said, well, if that's what Yahweh's moving you to, it's great. But there were a few people that said, are you sure? Are you sure? And then boom, a few months later, the country's closed down. You couldn't. Even the Jews couldn't for a year. You couldn't go to the Wailing Wall. Religious, nobody. You couldn't leave your house. You were locked in your house because of the mandates that happened. So, praise Yahweh, but we were in the wilderness. We never missed a beat. We never missed a feast. And that's why you have to hear the voice of Yahweh. And I say this, from Numbers. You got to know when that cloud is moving, because if in your life you don't move with that cloud, you're in trouble. Because once that cloud moves, right? Remember, Israelites there and the cloud is over the camp. And as that cloud moves, and it doesn't know, it could be a day, it could be a month, it could be a year. You have no idea when it's going to move. And what is that for? Because you're not to build a life in Satan's community. So you could be there one day or 1 month, and what happens, as you put it up, take it down, But the key is, if you didn't move when that cloud moved, and you stayed behind, how do you ever find it? It didn't look any different than any other cloud. How did you know it was the cloud of Yahweh? Because it's over the tabernacle. But once that cloud moves and you don't move with it, how on earth do you find it? So you better be praying in your life, because things are changing very, very quickly. And if you don't move with that cloud and you get left behind, you're in trouble. I remember with Church of God when it was breaking up. And, I was in Church of God for many years. I came in as a young man. It was the greatest time of my life. I had hundreds of friends. I loved it. I would do anything. I served, whatever. But when the man who took over for that congregation stood up here at the pulpit, like I'm speaking today, and said, we're a New Testament congregation. The Sabbath is no longer a commandment, I was out that door. Because I wasn't coming for friends. I wasn't coming for anything but the truth. And now you said that, you are no longer a watchbearer. You're not part of the true congregation anymore. You just gave up the sign that makes you part of that true congregation.
Right.
So that was it for me. But you know what happened to friends of mine that didn't leave? 6 months later, they didn't know up from down. They were being brainwashed in there. And then they're saying, well, we'll leave. We're waiting for GOD to do something. I'm like, do something? Wow. You didn't see what's going on here? The whole thing broke apart. There's hundreds of this. Everything's going on. They're still sitting there listening to someone telling them they can eat pork. You've got to move when that cloud moves. You've got to. Because if not, you're lost. You won't know where to go from there. So that's an important lesson. But the second wilderness has begun. 1 Corinthians 10. And you know what? This is so amazing. And I did a sermon on this a couple of years ago. It's a quote. But 1 Corinthians 10. It says, and I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, right? They're there with that cloud, and all passed through the Red Sea. And were all baptized to Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank the spiritual rock following, and that rock was Messiah, right? So the rock that's coming, right? That is Yeshua. Yet Elohim was not pleased with most of them, for they were scattered in the deserted place, right? The desert is not the promised land, the wilderness. But these things became examples for us, so that we may not be lusting after evil, even as those indeed lusted. Neither be idolaters, even as some of them, as has been written. The people sat down to eat and drink, and rose up to play. Neither should we commit fornication, as some of them fornicated, and 23,000 fell in one day. Neither let us tempt the Messiah, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents. Neither should you murmur, as some of them murmured, and perished in the hand of the destroyer. So these are all the things that we're supposed to be learning from them. And look what it says here. And these things happened to those as examples, and it was written for our warning on whom the ends of the ages has come. So not to say for the last 2,000 years that every believer couldn't learn from this, but it wasn't written for them. It was written for us. This is written for us because we're in that second wilderness now. And how many people made the first wilderness? 20 and above. 2. I say, I'm a mathematician. I don't like those odds. You know, out of maybe 2 million, you know, it's debatable, but 2 people that make it, hey, they're tough odds. So this is why, these are the things they did wrong, and these are the things where we got to get through that second wilderness. And we got to make sure we don't fail. All these things happen to those as examples is written for our warning on whom the ends of the world have come. So we have to make sure that we're learning the lessons the Israelites didn't. Exodus 3. And what are these big things that Yahweh's doing in the restoration ministry? What is He restoring? Well, the very first thing is His name. I've heard Sabbath-keeping congregations before make the comment that, you know, when asked them, well, why don't you use the name Yahweh? And they say, well, if I use the name Yahweh, people won't know what I'm talking about. I say, well, they certainly ain't going to know what you're talking about if you don't use it. You know, how are they ever going to find out? You know, if that's His real name, why wouldn't you use it? It's very simple. It's there almost 7,000 times just in the Tanakh. And Moses was, Exodus 3, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock behind the wilderness and came to the mountain of Elohim to Horeb. We just saw the pictures there. That's why I said Horeb is one of the mountains of Mount Sinai. That's there. And the messenger of Yahweh, Yeshua, appeared to him in a flame of fire from the middle of the thorn bush. Possibly that thorn bush that we just saw. And he looked, and behold, the thorn bush was burning with fire, and the thorn bush was not burned up. And Moses said, I will turn aside now and see this great sight, why the thorn bush is not burned up. And Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see, and Elohim called to him from the middle of the thorn bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, I am here. And he said, do not come near here. Pull off your sandals. We were just talking about the importance of the sandal. From your feet, for the place which you are standing is holy ground. It's kadosh. And he said, I am the Elohim of your fathers, the Elohim of Abraham, the Elohim of Isaac, the Elohim of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he feared to look upon the Elohim. Drop down to verse 11. And Moses said to the Elohim, whom am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel from Egypt? And he said, I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you bring out the people from Egypt, you shall serve Elohim on this mountain, the mountain we just saw. And Moses said to the Elohim, behold, I shall come to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Eloah of your fathers has sent me to you. And they will say to me, what is his name? What shall I say? And Elohim said to Moses, Ayah, Asher, Ayah, I am that I am, because Yahweh always says what He does before He says who He is. It's the functional way of thinking. I am that I am. And He said, you shall say this to the sons of Israel, Ayah has sent me to you. And Elohim said to Moses again, you shall say this to the sons of Israel, Yahweh, the Eloah of your fathers, the Eloah of Abraham, the Eloah of Isaac, the Eloah of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. What's so hard to understand about that? This is my name forever, and this is how I should be remembered from generation to generation. So here it is, you know, that Yahweh clearly says that His name is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and up until modern times with the unscholarship of the internet, nobody really doubted the name was Yahweh. We have so many records of it going back thousands of years. You know, all kinds. Did a really good PowerPoint when I was at Michigan a couple of years ago. We have it online. But all of this modern day exotic ways of saying Yahweh's name basically come from people that don't even understand it. You know, but we know that that is His name. And again, we don't speak Hebrew, so we don't have the guttural sounds. So I'm not saying exactly, you know, that way. You know, like we usually say Yahweh. We don't use the yah, the with the breath that comes out, but a form of that, very, very close to that. You know, because again, I'm not talking about having accents. I'm talking about how the name is said. And yet, if you go in the world today, what percentage of people are even using Yahweh's name? Consider this, almost 1 in 3 people on this whole earth are Christian to one form or another. 2.5 billion people or more are Christian. And virtually nobody, whether you're Christian, Sabbath keeper, whatever, or using his name. And this is what he says, this is my name forever. And again, I can give you 100 scriptures that say don't use any other name and don't pray in any other name. And if you do, and over and over and over, and people just say it doesn't matter. You know, it's like, wow, it doesn't matter. And yet at the same rate, you know, if you go up to them, you know, no, not Schmelvin. It's Schmelvin. You know, get the right hyphen on that S. So everybody's so worried about their own name, right? And how they want to say it. And yet when it comes to Creator's name, it don't matter. You know, it's wow. It's like, what are we saying here? So I believe this is one of the first main important reason. When we went there last November, I was sharing it with the people that was with us, because as far as I know, I don't know of any other sacred name group that has gone up there. There's been very few groups, period, that have gone up there, but I know like the groups with some of the other ones that are going there, they don't use the sacred name. You know, and if they do, they're not using the correct sacred name. They're using Jehovah or something else. But Yahweh didn't do this whole restoration to have the name of God or have the name of Jehovah or some other false name glorified. He's doing this to have his name glorified. Ezekiel 38 and verse 23. And again, Ezekiel 38 and 39 is all end time. And it says, and I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of the many nations, and they will know that I am Yahweh. That's the point. Because his name is Kadosh. It's set apart from everything else. And that's why the Jewish people, they don't even say the name, because they give credence to it. Because in the third commandment, when it says not to take the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in vain, it literally means to change, to falsify, or to make comment. So if you're saying the Creator's name every third word, you're making a comment. So we should think about it. I knew a priest in Jerusalem, a really old man, he's passed away now, but he used to say to me, he said, you don't just say, you know, the sacred name, and he used the name Yahweh. He said, clearly that's the name. This guy was a historian. He said, you say the Almighty, you say, you know, the exuberant, you put something there with it, because you have to set that name apart. How important that name is. Ezekiel 39, one chapter over, verse 7. He says, and I will make my holy name known in the midst of the people Israel. And I will not let my holy name be profaned anymore, and the nation shall know that I am Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. So he's saying this is part of it, and wow, what an honor that he's allowing us to be part of that restoration. That he's allowing us to be part of restoring that name to the world. And again, it doesn't mean that people have to accept it. What it means is that he's giving us the job to bring it. And everybody has free will. So people can accept it or not accept it. We're not here to change anybody. We're just here to witness of the truth. You know, that's the main thing, witnessing of the truth. So it's a really, really important thing. There is no restoration work without the name of Yahweh. So anybody or any congregation or any ministry that claims to be part of Yahweh's restoration end time work, they have to have his name. It's just that simple. Because that's all that matters. It doesn't matter with people. It doesn't matter about me or anybody else. What matters is that in that time, everyone on the earth will know the name of Yahweh. They will all know him. So that's why it's important that that his name gets glorified and not man. So it's very interesting. I knew that before we went the first time, because Yahweh had shared with me, you know, go there and restore my name to the mountain. We prayed there at the mountain, and you know, prayed for restoring Yahweh's name, and it was really an amazing trip we had there in November. And when we just took this trip last month, I didn't know the second reason that Yahweh was restoring until the middle of the trip, because I found out as we got to the mountain that there was brethren from Thailand that had just got married, and they wanted to do their marriage vows over there at Mount Sinai. And it was like, wow, that was great. And it was during the ceremony, as I'm doing the marriage vows with them, that Yahweh hit me. I want you to restore the wedding, because that's the wedding covenant. That's where it happened at Mount Sinai. You know, and that's the second thing that he is restoring. He's restoring the covenant, wedding, marriage covenant. Covenants are binding. We went over this with the new people that were immersed today. There's sacred agreements between two parties, and the blood covenant is the most sacred of all covenants. Not every covenant is a blood covenant. Sabbath, if you look in the Bible, you have the first covenant, you have the second covenant, the new covenant, you have the Levitical covenant, you have the Sabbath covenant. You know, there's different covenants that Yahweh has there. Not every one is a blood covenant, but blood covenants are the most sacred. And I'll just very quickly go over with you the 9 steps to an ancient blood covenant. I have messages on this online that you can get all of it, but the first thing you do is take off your robe or your coat. So the two people would come together to make a covenant relationship. And what that's showing is that you're giving of your whole self to that person. So we see it when David made covenant with Jonathan. That's what they did. They took off their robe. Second thing is they take off their belt. The belt holds your armor, you know, your knife or whatever in the armor. So it's that showing that you're trusting in that covenant partner for all the things. So you're taking off your belt and your bow, your sword, everything is in there. So you're trusting that you're showing that covenant partner is your strength. Number 3, you actually cut the covenant. So you're cutting an animal. And we see it in Scripture. It talks about when you cut the animal in 2. So this happened at Mount Sinai. They literally cut an animal in half. And what would happen is literally you would go back to back and you would make a figure 8 through the cut animal. And then you would come facing each other, and then you would give the terms of the covenant. So that was the third part of the blood covenant. And then you would raise the right arm and mix the blood. I don't know if you ever did this as kids. I never knew what it meant. You know, as kids, we're going to be blood brothers. And you cut your little finger and you go like that. This is where it comes from. This is a 4,000 or 5,000 year old ceremony of mixing the blood, because it's like the two becoming one. And interesting enough, even when a man and a woman get married, you know, in the perfect circumstances, if she's a virgin, you know, the same thing is happening, you know, with the blood. The 5th thing is exchanging names. So now you're exchanging names with your covenant partner. We do that when people get married, right? The wife takes the name of the husband. Number 6, you make a scar, you know, just like with Yeshua. He had the scar in his side and in his wrists. Number 7, you give the terms of the covenant. So this never happened in Mount Sinai. When Moses went up to get the terms of the covenant, the golden calf happened. So that's how we know the covenant was never ratified on Mount Sinai, because the terms were never given, and you can't be bound to an agreement that you don't know what the agreement is. So we know this from lawyers. It's the same thing. So if you're going to buy a house from somebody, and somebody, the person's coming in, you're going to meet them there, you're going to sign the papers, and you're going to buy a house. If you don't have a contract, you're not just going to buy it, without knowing the terms. Well, how much do I have to pay? When is he going to give me my money? So you have to give the terms of the covenant. Number 8 is you eat a memorial meal. We know the wedding supper that happens after Yeshua returns. And number 9, you plant a memorial tree. So those are the 9 steps of the ancient blood covenant, which Yeshua did all in the message I give online. I show how all of those 9 steps were done by him with his death. But this is what Yahweh was showing me about covenants. Covenants are binding agreements between the two parties. The blood covenant is the most sacred of all covenants, and only death can break a blood covenant. That's why, you ever think how amazing it is? We live in a world where everything is different, right? And things change so fast. And yet, in 6,000 years, why do people still marry? Like, marriage is kind of an odd thing if you think about it. If you don't have the Bible, why would people do that? You have people from all different religions. You have pagans. You have, atheists. You have all kinds of things. And why would, no matter whether you're born in China or Timbuktu or Antarctica, do two people come together in front of witnesses and make vows till death do them part? Because without that, you cannot last one generation. Think about it. Without the marriage covenant, you can't last in this world one generation. It is so sinister what's happening in these days today. And they're trying to make it sound like it's normal, with people having multiple partners and open marriages. No, it works. It's even better. And it's like, it is so much nonsense, because just human nature shows that people are possessive. And that's not in a bad way. If you have a wife, you should be possessive. Or if you have a husband, it shouldn't be like, oh, okay, yeah, you want to go with this guy tonight, go ahead. That is utterly nonsense and ridiculous, and it will never, ever work. And that's why this is the only thing in 6,000 years that Yahweh has preserved is the marriage covenant. And logically, you can't figure it out, because why would people do it? Why would two Chinese people that are pagans be doing the same thing that two Christians are doing in America 8,000 miles away? It's because the world can't survive. I'm telling you, you cannot survive one generation once the marriage covenant is gone. And we're there. We're there already. The marriage covenant, for all intents and purposes, is just about over. People don't want it anymore. People are living together without it. But without that level of commitment to each other, what do you really have? What on earth do you have if you have no level of commitment to be with another person, till the death do you part? Our human nature is already evil. It's not like most people think we're good people and we sometimes do bad things. The total opposite. People are evil from the core that sometimes do good things. But at least, if you're brought up with some kind of morality, you're going to stick to your morality. But do away with this marriage covenant, I'm telling you, you will not last one generation, and we're just about there. So it's very interesting that the word for covenant in Hebrew is berith, and the word picture, originally, again, I was saying this when I was showing the hieroglyphics, it was not 22 letters. Like today, we have letters and we make words. It was 22 pictures. So like the word in Hebrew for father is Abba. It's the Aleph and the Bet. The Aleph is a picture of an ox. The Bet is a picture of a house. The father is the strength of the family. And without knowing Hebrew, if you have those 26 or 22 pictures, you could look at any Hebrew word and you could figure out what the ancient meaning to it was. So it's very interesting that the word for covenant is the sealing of the work of the family of the Most High. That's what literally the word picture means. The sealing of the work of the family of the Most High. So that covenant, which again, remember, before Yahweh made, Adam and Eve in creation, what was there? It was only spiritual things. There wasn't matter. There wasn't physical things that were on the earth. So relationships, there was no marriage. There was no father-son. Yeshua was not the son of the Father until he came to the earth later. And I don't know if we really realize that, the power of that, because he was an eternal being that was equal with Yahweh. Philippians say that. And he literally gave up that eternal state of being to go in the womb of a woman, come out as a baby, poop his diaper when he's the creator of the world, and grow up in a body like we have. Getting sick, getting sorrow, getting, everything. So it's amazing, but that's when he became the son. Literally, when the Ruach, went inside of Miriam, the mother, and Yeshua was born from there. So relationships, when we look at them, it's what they represent. And we know, as the bride of Messiah, we're going to be with Yeshua forever. But what does that mean, a marriage between one man and one woman forever? It means a commitment. Because think about this, right? I don't care who you are in the world, there is no perfect marriage anywhere. Every single marriage has problems and ups and downs. And if there was an out where anytime you had a problem, you could just walk away and go with somebody else, wow, the divorce rate is already close to 60%, it would probably be 99%. But the fact that Yahweh makes it, that you've got to work through those problems. And what it shows us, what it shows us? He works through those problems. Because he wants us to do it, because that's what Yeshua is doing with us. Because Yeshua could easily do the same thing. I'm going to prove it to you here in a minute from the scriptures. Because he fulfilled his covenant vow to Israel. He fulfilled that. And it's only till death do us part. So when after that, he could have went and gotten another bride. The same way, if you have a husband or a wife that passes away, you could remarry. There's nothing against scripture with that, if your spouse is dead. But yet, at the same rate, what did Yeshua do? He came and took the same bride. He came back for Israel because he's showing us that this is his way. With covenant relationships, it's about loyalty, and it's about bonding, and it's about sacrificing of yourself for another person. And it's just in the world we see today, it's just, you don't see that much. Because what do we see from 2 Timothy 3? I'm not going to go there, but in the end time, we have truce breakers, we have people that are selfish. We're just living in another time period now, and that's why the marriage covenant is so important as believers, that we try to keep it as best as we can. People are willing to change their word, it doesn't matter what it is. Somebody will say, oh, I'll help you move this Sunday, you got to move that piano, and all of a sudden Sunday comes, and oh, my back hurt me, or this hurt me, it's like, is your word your bond? That's the saying from times past, because a bond is like, when you buy a bond, that's like gold, You're giving money, and then when that bond comes up, you're getting so much money back from it. And is your word your bond? Are you keeping your word to that? Because life is basically a test to see how faithful we will be to Yeshua for eternity. And if you think about it, these 40, 50, 60, 70, even 80 or 90 years in this flesh is nothing compared to eternity. I mean, eternity, you're talking about billions of zillions of trillions of years. That's 1 second of eternity. So, I mean, that's what got me in the truth. When I looked at my life, and I was young, but I said, wow, I can either live my life now for these 60, 70, if I'm blessed to do that. I might die at 30. I might die at 20. Or, wow, I can get in this 401k of Yahweh for eternity. Eternity. No end. Live forever. I'm in. I'll take it. I'll take that plan, the eternity plan. But we have to be tested, because Yahweh and Yeshua, they want to make sure that we are faithful. Deuteronomy 23 and 21. It says, when you vow a vow to Yahweh your Elohim, you shall not delay to perform it, for Yahweh your Elohim will certainly require it of you, and it shall be sin to you. Verse 23, that which has gone out of your lips you shall keep, and you shall do according to as you have vowed, a free will offering to Yahweh your Elohim. Do even that which you have spoken with your mouth. So it's a commandment. We are to keep any word that comes out of our mouth. We are to keep it. And I know at times, because like I said, I travel a lot and I do a lot, and there's times where I overcommit myself. But when I do, even to your own hurt, it talks about in Psalm 15, you have to keep your word. There's times that things come up. You could have a flat tire or something. I'm not talking about that. But for the most part, when we give our word, we have to be people of our word and accountability. Matthew 12 and verse 34. This is all part of the Sinai marriage covenant. Matthew 12 and verse 34. He says, generation of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And again, the heart is just a muscle, but he's talking about the heart, the mind, our thoughts. The good man out of the good treasure of the heart puts forth good things, and the evil man out of the evil treasure puts forth evil things. But I say to you that every vain word, whatever man may speak, they shall give an account in judgment day. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So very clearly, we want to make sure that we're keeping our words. And there's no greater commitment, beside your baptism commitment, is your marriage commitment. Because like I said, there's nothing else. If your wife wants you to take a vacation in the Poconos, you don't have to go before witnesses and make a vow and all that stuff. But you do when you get married. You got to go before witnesses, and you have to make that vow till death do you part, and Yahweh expects us to keep that. And the blood covenant, like I said, is the most sacred covenant. We know that even in ancient times, I'm not going to go there, but in Deuteronomy 22, verse 13 through 21, we know that if a husband married a wife, and for some reason he was unhappy with her, and he made charges against her that she was not a virgin, what would happen? The mother of the bride would have to come out with the sheet, and the blood on the sheet proving that she was a virgin on the wedding night. So that was literally, they didn't have back then, they didn't have writing paper and all this other stuff, but that was literally proof of the virginity of the woman. And that's a law in Torah that says that. They keep the proof there, and if it was lied, if the woman was a virgin, then the person would be fined. But if the woman was indeed not a virgin, she would be stoned to death. So it shows you, the importance of chastity before Yahweh and commitments. Keeping that. Mark 10. Mark 10, we see there is no divorce in Scripture. Mark 10 and verse 1. It says, and rising from there, he came into the borders of Judea by the other sides of the Jordan, and again crowds came to him, and he again taught them as they were accustomed. And coming near, the Pharisees asked him if it is lawful a man to put away his wife, tempting him. So you got to understand the background of this. In this day, there were two types of thought in Israel on divorce. there were two rabbis. One was called Rabbi Hillel, one was called Rabbi Shammai. So Rabbi Hillel, he was the one that felt that you can divorce your wife, but only in the case of adultery. Rabbi Shammai was of the case you could divorce your wife basically for if she burns your toast. So that's what they're asking him. Whose side are you on? Do you take Rabbi Hillel or do you take Rabbi Shammai? And look what Yeshua does. It's a certain type of teaching that we see in the New Testament called Kol B'Komer, where they give the least and then they give the greatest, but then Yeshua goes above it, even the greatest. So now, what does he say? But answering them, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife tempting him? But answering, he said to them, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses is allowed to write a bill of divorce and put her away. And answering, Yeshua said to them, with respect to your hard-heartedness, he wrote this command to you. But from the beginning of creation, Yahweh created them male and female. Because of this, a man will leave his father and mother and will be joined to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. No longer are they two, but they're one. It's a miracle that happens. It's a miracle. It's a union that happens that Yahweh does, and it's a miracle making them one. Therefore, what Yahweh has yoked together, man cannot put apart. It's impossible. You know, it doesn't matter. You can go to a judge. You could have a piece of paper. It makes no difference. What Yahweh has put together, man can't separate. And again, in the house, his disciples asked him the same. And he said to him, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. So it's very clear. It's very clear that the seriousness of the marriage covenant. You know, so it's about the vow you make. And sometimes people say, well, you know, my wife or my husband, they left me. You know, but you know what? The fact that my wife left me, that wouldn't give me the right to go commit adultery. Then that's like saying, like, if somebody robs your house, you can rob their house. Or if somebody killed this one, you can kill them. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. So my point is, I made a commitment between Yahweh and my wife. It's a three-way commitment when I got married, that till death do them part between me and my wife, and I made that commitment to Yahweh. So if my wife breaks that commitment, she's in trouble. But that has nothing to do with me. I still have to keep that commitment until my wife dies, you know, or until Yeshua returns. Because the whole point of it is, I got to prove to Yeshua that I'm going to be faithful to him for eternity. And I need to keep that commitment, whether my wife keeps it or not, or, you know, the other way, the wife in the same situation. So let's go to Exodus 24, in the making of the covenant. Exodus 24, verse 3. Because Mount Sinai, it was a marriage covenant. The first covenant was a marriage covenant. It says, and Moses came, Exodus 24, verse 3, and told all the words of Yahweh to the people and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, we will do all the words which Yahweh has spoken. Right? Out of your mouth you'll be justified. And Moses wrote all the words of Yahweh, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar below the mountain. We just saw that altar. The altar that he just wrote, we just saw it. We saw it. And 12 memorial pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. We saw them too. And he sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered up burnt offering and offered sacrifices of bulls, peace offerings to Yahweh. And Moses took half of the blood, and he put it in basins, and he sprinkled half of the blood in the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, and he read in the ears of the people, and they said, we will do all that Yahweh has spoken, and we will hear. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled on the people, and said, behold, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has cut with you concerning these words. Wow. So it's a blood covenant. He's cutting that marriage covenant that's there. And the key, though, is, like I said, it was never ratified. The covenant was never ratified because when Moses went up to get the terms of the covenant, the golden calf incident happened, and then everything changed. Levite comes in as a temporary mediator until Yeshua would come, and the covenant doesn't really get ratified until Yeshua does that in the new covenant. Exodus 32, verse 15. Exodus 32 and verse 15. It says, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, the two tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets written on their two sides, on this side and on that side they were written. And the tablets were the work of Elohim, and the writing was the writing of Elohim. It was engraved on the tablets. And Yehoshua heard the voice of the people, and they're shouting, and he said to Moses, a sound of war in the camp. And he said, it is not a sound of the cry of might, nor a sound of a cry of defeat. I am hearing the sound of singing. And it happened as he came near to the camp and saw the calf and dancers, the anger of Moses glowed, and he threw the tablets from his hand, and he broke them below the mountain. We were looking all over for them, but didn't find any. And he took the calf which they had made and burned it with fire and ground it until it was fine. Then he scattered it on the face of the water, and he made the sons of Israel to drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what has this people done to you that you have made them to come to this great sin? So we see the covenant, like I said, was never ratified because Moses didn't bring the terms. So you couldn't have the covenant ratified without giving the terms of the covenant. And actually, in ancient Israel, if you look at the ancient Israel marriage ceremony and customs, literally when they would make the covenant, they call it a ketubah, when they would make the agreement to get married during the betrothal period, it's as if they're married already. So even though you're not technically married, it's only the betrothal. And we see that with Miriam and Joseph, because they were betrothed, they weren't married yet, and he is called her husband. So during the betrothal period, that's the only time that a marriage can be broken off. Because if one of the parties is unfaithful during the betrothal period, then it can be separated. And that's what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 7. That a person still can marry at that point because technically they never gave the vows. Because that was the question they were asking. What happens if somebody's engaged and they never get married? Are they allowed to remarry? It's like, well, it's not remarried. They were never married. So in ancient Israel, they looked at the betrothal period as being married in itself, but if there was unfaithfulness in that time, it could be broken. So that's why you could look at certain scriptures that almost look like Yahweh did marry them, but it was because it was the betrothal period. They were betrothed to him, but never did they consummate the marriage because they never gave the agreement. They never had the terms of the marriage. But that's why for Yeshua, he was still bound to that marriage covenant till death do us part. And that's why in John 19 and verse 28, look what he says. Why do you think when Yeshua came, what did he say to the disciples? Do not go the way of the Gentiles, but go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Because that's who he was betrothed to. He was still betrothed to Israel. And that's the covenant that Yahweh is working with, the house of Judah and the house of Israel. John 19 and verse 28. And after this, knowing that all things have been finished, that the scripture be completed, Yeshua said, I thirst. Then a vessel full of vinegar was set, and having filled a sponge with vinegar and putting hyssop around it, they brought it to his mouth. And when Yeshua took the vinegar, he said, behold, it is finished. And bowing his head, he delivered up the spirit. So why is he saying it's finished? Because basically, till death do us part. Now he fulfilled the covenant to Israel and to Judah. And actually, like I said, till death do us part. He could have now, in the new covenant, he could have made the covenant with anybody. He could have made it with the house of Betel. He could have made it with the house of, whoever. But look what happens. Does he find somebody else? Hebrews 8 in verse 8. Who is the new covenant with? It says, for finding fault with them, he said to them, behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So even though by law he could have started covenant with the new people, he didn't. The new covenant is still with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. He says, not according to the covenant which I made with your fathers in the days of taking their hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I rejected them, says Yahweh. Because this is the covenant which I will covenant with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahweh. I'll put my Torah in their mind, and I'll inscribe it on their heart, and I will be their Elohim, and they will be my people. And they will no more teach one their neighbor and their brother, saying, know Yahweh, because all will know me from the least to the great one. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and I will not remember their sins and their lawless deeds. Wow. So, Am I saying that nobody but an Israelite can come in the new covenant? Not at all. Anybody of any race, of any creed, anybody can, because Yahweh is creator of everyone, can join the new covenant, but the new covenant is with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. So you have to join in to that covenant. You do not see Yahweh making any covenant relationships with anybody outside of Israel until the millennium. In the millennium, Yeshua will make covenant with all nations. But up until that point, Yahweh is a restorer. You know, Yahweh is here for restoration. So he's got to restore the covenant with Israel first before he does anything else. So it's very interesting. Let's go to Hosea 1. Because like I was saying, look at the harlotry of Israel that Yahweh says. Hosea 1 and verse 2. It says, the beginning of the speaking of Yahweh by Hosea, and Yahweh said to Hosea, go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land is utterly gone lusting away from Yahweh. Now, why would he tell a prophet to go and marry a harlot? Because he's making a point. Hosea is representing the house of Israel. And he's saying the same way that Israel is a house of harlotry, this is what I want you to do. And he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, who conceived and bore him a son. And Yahweh said to him, call his name Jezreel, right? What does Jezreel mean? It means Elohim will sow or plant. And yet in a little while I will call to account the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and will cause the kingdom of the house of Israel to cease. And it will be in that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And she conceived again and bore a daughter, and said to him, call her name Lo Ruhama, no mercy. For I will not again have mercy on the house of Israel, but I will completely take them away. So this is, as they're going into captivity for all their harlotries, and he's prophesying. He says, and I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by Yahweh their Elohim. And I will not save them by bow, by sword, or by battle, by horses, or by horsemen. And she, having weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son. And he said, call his name Lo Ami, not my people. For you are not my people, and I will not be for you. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be as the sand of the sea, which is not measured or numbered. And in the place where it will say to them, you are not my people, it shall be said, sons of the living Elohim. So he's talking about their punishment, but he's talking about their redemption. And what's very interesting is, I'm not going to go there, but I think everybody knows, in John 21, when after Yeshua's resurrection, when the disciples are fishing, and they come, and he says, cast your net into the ocean. They say, Master, we've been fishing all night, we caught nothing. And they cast it in, and how many fish did they catch? 153. Remember, 153. Why is that number important? Because in Hebrew, originally there were no numbers, there were only letters. So the alphabet, every letter, the aleph is a 1, the bet is a 2. So when you're looking for, they call it gematria, every word has a number value to it. And what's interesting is recently I was sharing how with DNA now, the connector, there's billions of cells in your body, and the number that connects every cell is the number of Yahweh's name. The gematria of Yahweh's name that connects every cell. Can you imagine that? I mean, how amazing. Yeah, but here it is. He says, to them that are not my people, you will be sons of the living Elohim. The gematria of sons of the living Elohim is 153. So when Yeshua, that number, everything in Scripture is for a reason. So this is where it's showing, that we can't redeem ourselves. We're not possible. But Yahweh can redeem us. Yahweh can redeem us. Yahweh can do everything. And if we leave it to Him, He's a restorer and He's a redeemer. So He's showing here with Israel, as bad as they were and everything they're doing wrong, they will be redeemed. Where they were said, not my people, you will be called sons of the living Elohim. And the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together and will set over themselves one head. And they will go up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. And we're living in that time now. We're living in this restoration that Yahweh is doing. Go to chapter 2. Very interesting. Because I remember what I was saying about the importance of Yahweh's name. That's the cornerstone of the restoration. Starting in verse 13, it says, and I will visit on her the days of the Baals, in which she burned incense to them. Yea, she adorned herself with her nose rings and her jewels, and went after her lovers, and forgot me. He's talking about Israel. Therefore, behold, I will lure her and bring her to the wilderness, and speak to her heart. Here we are, the sons of Israel, right? And where's Yahweh taking us now? To the wilderness. Therefore, behold, I will lure her and bring her to the wilderness and speak to her heart. And from there I will give her vineyards to her in the valley of Achor, in the door of hope. And she will answer there as the days of her youth, as in the day when she came up out of the land of Egypt. And at that day, says Yahweh, you will call me my husband, and you will no longer call me my Baal. So the word Baal actually also means husband, but it means master. So it's a husband in the sense of a husband being like a master over the wife. Because in biblical times, a wife was a possession. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just saying a fact. That's the way it was. Women were possession. Because that's why if you were in covenant relationship, you covered your wife, your children, your family. But this is what he's trying to say. He's making the point, no longer will they call me my Baal for husband. They're not going to call me my master, for I will take the names of the Baals out of their mouth, and they shall no more be remembered by their name. And one thing I find that interesting in the days we're living in now is, what is the main word that most Christians use instead of Yahweh? The Lord this, the Lord that, the Lord, and then Lord. The word Baal is Lord.
Yes, it is.
It's the same word. It's master. That's where it comes from. So, even though technically that is not the main meaning of this verse, it's a secondary meaning of it, which is interesting. That he's going to take those names out of the mouth of these people that don't know any better right now. So I'm not judging them. They don't know any better. But in that day, they will know my name is Yahweh. And it's so wonderful to see Christian people that are good people and loving people and kind people that come to the truth, and then they find out the name of Yahweh. And like I say, it's all about relationship. It's not about religion. But how many people do you know in a very intimate way that you don't know their name? It's not that way. And you see it, as you meet people. If you call someone Mr. So-and-so, you probably don't have a real intimate relationship with that person. And if you don't even know their name, you certainly don't have a relationship. So, names are important because every name in the Bible, every single name in the Bible has a meaning to it. Right? So that's why I say, sometimes people say, oh, Elder Don's trying to say we have to use Hebrew names. It's like, not at all. Because every Hebrew name is transliterated in the Bible except one, Yahweh. David is called David. It's like Yaakov is called Jacob. Every name is transliterated except for Yahweh. Yahweh is the only name that's not transliterated. It's changed to another name of a pagan deity. So why on earth would he be good with that? And he's saying in that day he will take those names out of their mouth, and everybody, from the least to the great, will know my name is Yahweh. How beautiful is that, right? How beautiful is that? And he says, and in that day I will cut a covenant for them with the beasts of the field and with the birds of the heaven and the creepers of the ground. And I will break the bow and the sword and the battle out of the earth, and I will make them to lie down securely. And I will betroth you to me forever. Yes, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and judgment and in mercy and compassions. I will either betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you will know Aleph Tav Yahweh. Who's the Aleph and the Tav? Yeshua. And it will be in that day I will answer, says Yahweh, I will answer the heavens and shall answer the earth. And the earth shall hear the grain and the wine and the oil, right? The fullness of everything in that day. And they will answer Jezreel. And I will sow her to me in the land, and I will have mercy on no mercy. And I will say to not my people, you are my people. And they will say, my Elohim. Wow. So as human beings, and I've had people come to me before, that the only thing that stops them from being baptized is they feel they're not good enough. And I say, that's the whole reason why you should be. If someone doesn't feel they're not good enough, then you shouldn't be baptized. The whole reason we're being baptized is because we're not good enough. We're not good enough. And here you see a situation where Yahweh and poetically is showing these people that went against him, that did these sins, that did all these things, and yet he can redeem that. He can change that. And he does. What a loving and merciful great Father that we have. Well, Yeshua calling back Israel as his bride, and it all started in Mount Sinai. That's where the wedding covenant starts. So let's go to Matthew 22. Because you know what? There's a wedding that's coming. There's a wedding that's coming. Because when Yeshua returns, and like I said, we might be in that last 7. Could be 2 more. Who knows? Outside chance even a 3rd. Doubt it very much. Only Yahweh knows the times and the seasons. But there's a wedding coming one way or another. And the invitations have gone out. invitation's out. Did you get yours? Let's read it. Matthew 22. And answering, Yeshua again spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven is compared to a man, a king, who made a wedding feast for his son. And he sent his slaves to call those being invited to the wedding feast, but they did not desire to come. And again he sent slaves, saying, tell the ones invited, behold, I prepared my supper, my oxen and the fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come to the wedding feast. And they sneered at it, and they went away, one to his field and one to his trading. And the rest, seizing his slaves, mocked and killed them. And hearing, the king became angry, and sending his armies, he destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, indeed, the wedding is ready, but those invited are not worthy. Then go into the exits of the highways and call to the wedding feast as many as you may find. And going out into the highways, those slaves gathered all, as many as they found, both good and evil. And the wedding feast was filled with reclining guests. And the king, coming in to look over those reclining, he saw a man there not having been dressed in a wedding garment. And he said to him, friend, how do you come in here not having a wedding garment? But he was speechless. Then the king said to the servant, binding his hands and his feet, take him away and throw him into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen. So wow, and we know what those wedding garments are. You know, in Revelation 19, it's our character that we're building. It's getting every spot and wrinkle out of our life. You know, and it's making our commitment to Yahweh first in our life, and serving Him and helping people and living what we are. You know, not just saying it in word, but saying it in deed. And that's what we said. How do you know if you have faith or not? If there's not a deed, there's not faith. You know, that's what faith is. Faith is action. Faith is a deed. And like I was telling somebody what I learned on this last school, that there's no such thing as 99% faith. You know, if I said to you, I'm 99% responsible, that's a good thing. Because there's always, as a human being, you're never going to be 100% responsible. When it comes to faith, you've got to be 100%. There is no 99%. Either you believe or you don't believe. Because, like I said, when it comes down, you're not going to die for a doubt. If you have any doubts in your life, you better get rid of them. And we're living in a time where there's a great martyrism that's coming. But you're not going to die for a doubt. So we want to make sure the wedding invitations are out. Did you get yours? How much are we sacrificing for the kingdom of Yahweh? You know, what an honor. We're here in this tiny little room with a small group of people, right? And yet there's 8 billion people out there that Yahweh could have called. And it doesn't mean we're any better than anybody, you know. He calls the weak of the world. That's why I say, thank you, Father, I'm weak enough that I was able to be called. Thank you for that. But one thing we should do, if we're grateful for it, we should want to go out and we should want to serve. We should want to help. We should want to, you know, bear fruit for His kingdom to show Him the appreciation that's coming. And we have to sanctify our lives. 2 Corinthians 6, because that's what the wilderness is for. The wilderness is not just to, you know, get away into a deserted area, to hide in the mountains. That's not what it's about. Because we always have to serve Yahweh, no matter where we are. But it's about being sanctified from the system in this world. 2 Corinthians 6. Starting in verse 15. It says, what agreement does the Messiah have with Satan? Or what part does a believer have with an unbeliever? And what harmony does the sanctuary of Elohim have with idols? For you are the sanctuary of the living Elohim, as it is said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. And I will be their Elohim, and they will be my people. We just read this. Because of this, come out from among them and be separated, says Yahweh, and do not touch the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be a father to you, and you will be sons and daughters to me, says Yahweh Almighty. Then having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all defilement of flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of Elohim. So, you know, if we were living 100 years ago, in the times of Little House on the Prairie, probably as a believer, your life would be very different than your neighbor if they weren't a believer. Because, you know, people were pretty much the same, and there was a morality that was there, and the differences might be in the Sabbath day, or not eating pork, or this and that. But today, wow, the difference of an average person in the world compared to a believer, it's like night and day. It really is. And that's not our choice. We didn't want the world to be this way. You know, I mean, who would? Who would want to live in a world where, you know, you just the evil that you see out there, And like I said, one thing that is just abhorrent, and I hate to even get into it, but it's a reality, is the child sex slave that's out there. It is worse than you can ever imagine how bad it is. And it was interesting because I was watching the news, several months back, and this reporter came up with it and said, yeah, but you know something, because they're talking about, they said, it couldn't be if there wasn't a market for it, right? And what does that tell you? What does that tell you? That the kind of thing that's out there today, that when people don't have Yahweh, and that's what they're trying to do, they want to take Yahweh out of it, and they want to leave this vacuum there. And what are people getting in that vacuum? They're getting every kind of sickness and evil and immorality in the world. And praise Yahweh, He's called us out of that. But we need to be that light. We need to be that light in darkness. We need to be growing in patience and love and, kindness. And we need to be showing that we are His children and getting every spot and wrinkle out of it. But we need to be coming out of the world. That's part of what the wilderness is all about. It's about sanctifying us, because when the kingdom of Yahweh comes, it's diametrically different than the system that Satan has here. Last scripture I'm going to go in is Revelation 18. Because, as we're watching all these things happening in the world, and wow, we can see prophecy coming about before our eyes. It's amazing that we could literally be watching prophecy. And one of the things with prophecy is the fall of Babylon, which is not in the too distant future. And you want to know something? I'm 60 years old this year. I grew up in this area over here, went to school in New Jersey and lived my whole life in that area over there. And I don't ever remember a time since I was born that not religious people, but the average citizen out there in this country is worried that this country can't go much longer like this. Even talking about civil war. I mean, come on, civil war. We would never have a civil war again, We might have certain things. But you could even have a civil war again. That's how diametrically different the society is here today. But everybody realizes America can't continue this way. It can't continue on this road financially, just building trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. Morality, the way it's going. I mean, when you have someone like Vladimir Putin telling us about our morality, and he's actually right, something's wrong here, When he's got more morality than we have, we got a problem. And it's sad to see it. But we are going on a decline so fast that it's sad to see, And I'm most of the time out of the country and with people that aren't Americans, but I cry. I cry for my country. I cry for my family. I cry for the brethren, because I don't want to see this, And the thing that hits the worst was, it wasn't the way America was made. People ask me all the time, should we celebrate July 4th and this and that? And it's not a religious holiday. Don't celebrate July 4th. Celebrate in a way of, think of what America was in 1776. Think of a time when America was that beacon of light on a hill. Think of the time when America was the one sending Bibles all over the world. Every missionary that went out. America was the one that brought this to all the world. And look how fast we've gone down because we forgot Yahweh. Because we've turned our back on Him. Taking prayer out of the school. Why on earth? Why would anybody want to take prayer out of school? And yet they put Satan statues, in town halls. It's not the average person. The average American is a good-hearted person, a kind person. The Americans are more giving than any people I've ever seen in my life. But there is people, on the top of this country that are not good for this country, that are running things, that are globalists. They could care less about America, and they are destroying this place because we see it. There's going to be a one-world government, and they're working right into it. And it's really, really sad, but you got to think about this as we're going, and this is what it says. And after these things I saw another cherub coming down out of heaven, having great authority, and the earth was lighted up from his glory. And he cried with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, it is fallen. It has become a dwelling place of those possessed by demons, and a home of every foul spirit, and a home of every unclean bird, even the home of every unclean and hateful beast. Because of the wine of the anger of a fornication which all the nations have drunk, even the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. and the merchants of the earth have become rich from the power of her trade. And I always knew that, like the corporations were strong, but only since COVID did I realize how strong. The politicians are not making the decisions, the corporations are making the decisions. And every American knows this. Just look at your health care, right? If you need something with health care, it's not anymore whether your doctor says you need it, it's whether your insurance company will pay for it. And that's what makes the decisions. Some bureaucrat in an insurance company is making the decision whether you get a heart operation, or you get this, or you get that. Something is wrong with this picture. There's something wrong here, when this kind of thing is happening. When you have corporations that are not people to people. It's something that everything is profit. It's something that is not a human thing or a human entity. And the merchants of the earth became rich from the power of her trade. And I heard another voice out of heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, or leave the land of her, my people, that you may not share in her sins and you not receive of her plagues, because her sins joined together have reached to heaven, and Yahweh remembered her unjust deeds." And the problem is, commercial Babylon is everywhere in the world, the system of trading, but it's America that started the system. And they brought it there, and they are going to get punished for it. "Give back to her as she gave back to you, and double for her according to her works. And the cup which she mixed to her double. And what things she glorified herself and luxuriated, by so much give back to her torment and mourning, because she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, I will not be a widow, I will not see sorrow." And that's unfortunately the way the country says. They figure they're never going to go down. But you know what? So did Rome, so did Greece, so did Egypt. Every empire figured they were never going to go down. Ancient Babylon, and there's a time for everything. "Because of this, in one day her plagues will come, death and mourning and famine, and she will be consumed with fire, for Yahweh Elohim judging her is strong. And the kings of the earth will weep for her and wail over her, those having fornicated and having luxuriated with her, when they see the smoke of her burning, standing from afar off, because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, that great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour her judgment came. And the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their merchandise anymore." Right? And that's why I say, only America fits this. And then it tells all the merchandise. Because even China may be selling a lot of merchandise, but China isn't buying. The Chinese are not buying. Americans are the ones buying all of this stuff that the world is making. And that's why when America goes down, the merchants of the earth will be crying, because nobody is buying their merchandise anymore. Drop down to verse 23. "And the light of the lamp will not shine in you never, and the voice of the bridegroom and bride will not be heard in you never, for your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and by your sorceries, your pharmakia, all the nations were deceived." By your pharmakia, right? By your medicine. And, it's part of the plot. All of these medicines that are killing people. If you go back to 1900, what you'll find is that almost every single doctor in America used herbal remedies. That's what was used. That's the way it was. Until Rockefeller came and started this whole modern system of medicine. And not to say that there's not a place for it. There are medicines that are good, but look at what you're taking, because not every medicine is good for you. And that's one of the things I see in the restoration ministry, no matter where I go in the world, and I meet people, not in our congregation, whatever, everybody that's part of Yahweh's restoration, we're all going back to natural ways, natural healings, herbal remedies, and there's, it's amazing to see how people are being healed from a lot of these things. So, Babylon there's prophesied for these things that are coming in here. And we really have to be thinking about it. We're living in that time now where I say, like I said, to me, I am so thankful COVID was one of the greatest blessings in my life, because it woke me up. It really woke me up to how short the time is. Seeing, on a global scale, how they can organize stuff that is absolutely evil. And I'm thankful for Yahweh for it, and I believe that it was a sign for His people to show us what's coming. Because a lot of people would have never thought, oh, come on, they'll never not let people go to supermarkets. Oh, they'll never... I mean, man, when you look at that time, and it wasn't that long ago, and depending on where you were, how bad it was. But like I said, I know where I was. You couldn't literally go in a supermarket if you didn't have the vaccine. So we're getting ready for that. We see that everything is going over to a cashless society, that these things, they have the whole system set up with it, you know, and even in America, last July, they already started with the Federal Reserve now. Instead of when you have a credit card, it's not being anymore being filtered every month through your bank. Everything is being through the Federal Reserve, the new FedEx system. And it's all moving really fast, faster than I think anybody can even analyze it. And I've always said this, you know, I was in business a lot in my life, and when you do something, you put out a plan, but then you have to take time to analyze that plan, because you got to see what's working, and then you maneuver what you have to change. But with all the things we have going on today, and AI and all these things, and companies trying to make sure they're not behind, and they're staying with this company and staying with this, they're moving so fast, we're not taking any time to analyze anything, whether something is good or bad, whether it works or not. It's just moving to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And people that are not religious whatsoever, people like Elon Musk, there's many people that are saying, you know, we need to slow down a little bit and really talk about, as a planet, where do we want to go from here? You know, because it's moving in a really, really fast direction. But just to come full circle on this, I believe, you know, I got off the message a little bit here at the end, but I believe really from Mount Sinai that for us as believers, I think it's extremely important, because like I said, for 3,500 years, that mountain just stayed there dormant, nothing going on there, nobody even knowing where it is. And now Yahweh revealing His name, revealing the covenant, and I'm excited what He's going to reveal the next time we go there. I don't know what it's going to be, but maybe some of you will be with us, you know. But I am thrilled. It's a neat place to be, and you know, seeing firsthand all the things of the mountain and Split Rock and all the other things is just fantastic. So I thank you for being here. We are going to take a little break. We have some food, some snacks we'll put out. Everybody's happy to stay and have some snacks. And if anybody has questions for me, I'll be hanging around here and answering questions. And that'll be it. So I'll just say a prayer before we